gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the 286 Project with me, Chris Akers. And on this podcast, we talk about art, culture, politics, sport, and anything else worth talking about. If you like this episode, if you like subsequent episodes and episodes that we've done before, then please like, subscribe, and share, and all that good stuff. Now, David Lynch was one of the most seminal film directors in America over the last 50 years. Films like Blue Velvet, Eraserhead, Mulholland Drive, Wild at Heart not only won awards but brought a new type of filmmaking to the fore, what is now known as Lynchian. And today's guest has written a book about David Lynch called Lynchian, The Spell of David Lynch. And he's here to talk to me about it now. His name's John Higgs. Welcome, John.
Hiya, Chris. Good to talk to you.
Likewise, likewise. Before we dive into David Lynch and his works, can you just explain to people who you are and what led you to write this book?
Yeah, I guess, I'm a writer. I do a lot of non-fiction books about what a sort of culture that interests me. I've written about William Blake. I've written about the KLF. I've written about the Beatles. It's broad stuff. I've written about the 20th century, things like that. I guess I'm interested in those areas of culture that seem to affect the world in a way that doesn't really make a lot of rational sense, that seems a lot more powerful and potent than a mere film or a mere song or something like that. And I think David Lynch fits that category quite well.
Yeah, indeed, indeed, he does. Not always films are like this, but a lot of films, if you didn't really know who he was or hadn't watched him often enough, you'd probably be wondering what's going on. And sometimes some people, it may take a few attempts for you to actually get the story and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But like with most stories, we'll start at the beginning. So, what led to Lynch's initial interest in not just filmmaking, but art in general?
He was just, his background was very small town America. It was very Republican 1950s, white picket fences. It was not avant-garde art by a long distance. Yet his personality essentially was that of an artist. And when he heard that there was such a job as an artist, a friend of his said his father was a painter, so he assumed he meant he painted houses or something like that. It's like, no, 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 he's a fine art painter. And that the realization that you could do that as a job just sort of blew his mind. And from that point on, I think he's only really saw himself as an artist, not a filmmaker. Um, that came later. He's that generation of filmmakers who typically grew up obsessed with film. The Spielbergs and the Scorseses and the Coppolas and George Lucas and that sort of generation. He's one of those that actually grew up with no interest in film. He just wanted to paint. He just wanted to sort of create art. And he had this moment when he was in art school, and he was doing this painting of a garden at night, very dark green foliage, uh, and he was staring at the painting, and he says the way he describes it was he heard something first. He heard this little wind, and then he saw the painting sort of ripple and sort of move, and he just thought, "Oh, this is wonderful. This is marvelous." He wasn't into drugs or anything like that. It was just a natural thing that he had this experience with this painting, and the realization followed that, well, film could make that happen. It's like the painting wanted to be alive. And film was a way to sort of create things in his head and get them across to other people. This is not a typical, origin story of a successful American filmmaker by any stretch. It's a very different thing. So he was coming from a very different place, um, with very different heroes and goals and things like that. It doesn't really quite fit in to American filmmaking, um, on many levels, but that's how he started.
Okay. So, how did you go from there to films? And did that journey involve him moving to Philadelphia?
Yeah, that was in Philadelphia when he was in art school, and he started to make little art films, short things. Then a half-hour one, the grandmother's one in particular, that got him a place in LA in a film school in Hollywood. So it gradually sort of swept him along. And when he was in this film school in Hollywood, he basically there, there was some stables around the land that this film school was in. He sort of basically moved into the stables and started to make what would be his student film, which is originally supposed to be a shortish film. But after about 4 or 5 years of just living in these stables and working on it, and pretty much being forgotten by the actual film school itself, he'd made this film called Razorhead. Um, and a Razorhead, as anyone who's seen it will tell you, is just not like anything else you've ever encountered in this world. It's the atmosphere of it, the strangeness. It's just unforgettable, really. Even the poster is just like this guy with a quiff, black and white photo of a bloke with a quiff. And there's something about it. When you first glimpse it, that picture, you're sort of slightly haunted by it. There's some quality to that film. So that's sort of what got him started as a film director, and he wanted to continue making, films of that ilk. He had a script called Ronnie Rocket that he was trying to make. Hollywood had no interest in him making his own films at that particular point. Um, they were too strange. They were just too weird for anything like that. And so he managed to get a job directing a film, The Elephant Man. And then he did directed a version of June. So he's a bit of a jobbing director for hire at that sort of point. At that point, but again, you know, I mean, his The Elephant Man is a magnificent film. It's like emotionally perfect. It's just spellbinding. It's just a wonderful thing. And people haven't seen it. This probably goes for all Lynch's films. Absolutely need to see it. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. But it didn't quite hint at quite how out there he could be, or quite how strange his work would get in the years to come.
Yeah, I have to say that's my favourite David Lynch film, The Elephant Man.
Yeah,
I think it's a really brilliant film. What
yeah,
attracted him to that material, especially because, as I'm correct, that was actually filmed in London, so he would have been
yeah.
away from America for a while.
Yes, it was. It was. It was. It was the. It was. There's a lot of grotesque, horrific looking images in Lynch's work. He's very much drawn to things like texture and decay and rotting things that most people would say, well, that's awful, that's horrible. But he would see it as beautiful. He had all these what he calls his experiments when he was in art school, where he'd have rotting birds and like a shaved mouse and really disturbing things for someone to have in their basement, when he would just sort of observe how they sort of changed and try and capture the texture of them and all this sort of thing. Very, very strange and disturbing. The story of the Elephant Man being someone who the world saw as grotesque and horrific, but who to Lynch was just, beautiful, really, just a unique human like no other, just looked like no other. He was obviously sort of drawn to that. And he was very young. He was a sort of a young, inexperienced American filmmaker being flown over to London and given a cast of extraordinary, accomplished British actors like Anthony Hopkins and people like that. He was entirely out of his depth. Um, and it's another one of those little strange stories in his life that I'm very much drawn to. He was, terrified that he couldn't do it, that he wasn't up to the task. And he was out looking for locations in a decaying old rundown hospital. And he describes this encounter with this this thing, this that makes no sense. Again, he describes it like a little wind came to him and it entered him and it gave him a complete knowledge of what the Victorian world was and what it would look like. And he knew it and he just got it. And having that sort of strength, that gave him the sort of you know, the the strength of character to sort of make the film and do it and argue down people like Anthony Hopkins and things like that and produce the magnificent film that he'd made. Um, this weird spirit entering him, you know, again, you don't get that with many filmmakers who sort of work on that sort of level.
Yeah, it makes me think that people must have had some sort of trust with him because, as you said there, the cast was really good. Yeah, Anthony Hopkins, John Hurt, who played Joseph Merrick as well. I can't remember the lady's name who starred in that, the actress who starred.
Oh yes, it will come to me the moment we stop speaking.
Yeah, yeah,
But she's fantastic. Yeah, she's very
yeah,
elegant. And what's her name? It'll come to me.
yeah. She's really good. And he actually paid off for Lynch because he was Oscar nominated as well, if I recall,
Yeah,
for Elephant Man. Yeah,
yeah,
uh,
for the script, I think it was.
yeah.
Oh no, it wasn't the script that time. It was
Director, I think he got.
yes, it was. Yes,
Um, but yeah, and obviously for someone in a second film to be nominated for Best Director, you must have a talent.
yeah. It
And then,
nearly got him the job of doing the next Star Wars.
well, yeah, I've watched the video as well, where he talks about it in very funny terms. But
Yeah,
you think about that now, in one sense, it'd be interesting, but then there's another sense where you think, why would you give that franchise to David Lynch?
yeah. I mean, he was obviously, with hindsight, he was obviously very wrong. There's some quite funny things on YouTube where people have tried to do a David Lynch version of the Return of the Jedi. Um, very, it's not he's not one for the child-friendly romps. Put it that way.
Yeah, yeah. Although he did have respect for George Lucas because,
Mm,
like Lucas, Lynch also is someone who wanted to do his own films.
definitely. I mean, I see them both as you know visionaries. When I say that, it's not a word I'd give to many people, but
Mhm.
their their visions were just opposites. You know, George Lucas took all the things of his childhood, his favorite films, his love of speed and cars, and he sort of transformed it into this thing that utterly changed the Hollywood forever. You know, it ushered in this era of blockbusters and uh, just transformed cinema. You know, but Lynch is a visionary in an opposite way. He just looks internally. You know, his films don't change the world, but they change the people who see them. You know, they're very sort of different. You know, we're lucky to have them both, I think.
Yeah, indeed. So if Lynch is someone who wants to do his own work, why on earth did he do Dune? Especially a book that's, I mean, it's probably been brought up in the last few years because of Denis Villeneuve's
Yeah.
versions where he split the book into two. I mean, I've never read the book, but people say that was actually the best decision.
Mm.
So why did Lynch decide to take that on for a book which a big book like that to put in all that material in one film must have been a monumental task. So why did he
Yeah.
do it?
It was an impossible task, absolutely, because they had very strict a rule about how long the film could be. That was, you know, in all the contracts. I think it couldn't be any longer than 2 minutes 18. It was something random like that, which he stuck to. But now when you see it, there's all this weird voiceover throughout it trying to explain it, and it's just too much story to try and get into. And it's not really a Lynchian story as well. He doesn't deal with, you know, politics, sort of, you know, social scale changes or you know, grand things like that. His stuff is much more sort of personal. It's about a person in a place and a thing that happens. It's not about society or anything like that. But he was just charmed, I think, by Dino De Laurentiis, the producer. He just felt good around those people um, who would, you know, trusted him and gave him the sort of budget he'd never see again, you know, for his filmmaking career, and gave him a possible task, and he regretted it. It is the one thing that he says he compromised. He had to make compromises throughout the whole thing. It wasn't what he would want to do with June. It was after he would never compromise again after that. He would always have final cut. He would always make the film he saw in his mind. He was so distraught by having to make so many compromises in June. Um, I mean, it was a learning thing, I guess. It was on some level, it was a strange thing for him to do, but it's not like he ever does things that aren't a strange thing for him to do.
Mhm.
Going into television was a very strange move. To make Twin Peaks, that was a very sort of unexpected thing. Something like The Straight Story would be seen as an unexpected film. He whether he saw it in those terms, I doubt it, but his choices were always, quite unexpected.
Yeah. So after doing, I think it was Blue Velvet that he
Yeah,
wrote and directed. A couple of things. Where did the idea for Blue Velvet come from? And also, that was his second collaboration with Carl McLachlan, if I
yeah.
recall. So, why was it about McLachlan? Because obviously, he used him later on in Twin Peaks and other films. So why was it about him that Lynch thought actually this could be someone who I can make films with going forward? Because certain directors have that as well. When they have one actor that does that, well, why? What was Lynch's reason for McLachlan being the actor?
Definitely. I mean, a large part of it does seem to be he could stand in for Lynch, basically. He was a Lynch-like character. He was from the Pacific Northwest. He had this sort of innocent goodness about him that could t easily tip into darkness. He sort of dressed us in a similar way. Lynch would always have his shirt buttoned up at the top, but with no tie. And so in Blue Velvet, Cal McLaughlin dresses like sort of Lynch does. He's a kind of a Lynch stand-in. And Blue Velvet was really the moment that Lynch became fully himself when he started telling stories about the type of world he came from. Like Twin Peaks, it's set in a northwestern logging town, surrounded by forests, surrounded by woods. Wood is a big sort of part of it. There's a shot in all these things of a lorry with huge logs on it going past a diner that just very much sums up, where he sort of came from. And so it's when he sort of moved away from trying to tell stories in Victorian London or outer space or something like that, and tell stories in the sort of world that he knew and
Mhm.
uh, and could make um, real, I guess, the stories that felt much more him. Um, and being grounded as they were in this sort of 1950s style remembered childhood landscape. With that level of grounding, it allowed him to go sort of stranger and more surreal and more trippy and more odd, um, without losing the audience because the whole film or the whole something like Twin Peaks wasn't just insane. Most of it was just beautifully realized, um, a world that you believe in and want to exist in. And then so when suddenly they go into a red room with a dwarf talking backwards or things things like that, it is grounded in his past.
I think Lynch, yeah, it was Lynch who talked about happy accidents, where
Hmm.
something would happen on a set or a rehearsal that no one's expected, but he was that good that he'd have to
Yeah.
put it in a final film. And I think with Blue Velvet, there was a couple. I think the
Mhm.
first one was his opening scene with his dog, and the man's lying on the ground, and the dog's like trying to capture water from the hose.
Oh
I
yeah.
think that was David Lynch's own dog. If
Yeah, Sparky. That
yes,
dog was the love of his life.
yeah, yeah, indeed. And the other one was to do with Dean Stockwell when he's had that lit microphone holding up, and
Mm,
it was singing that Roy Orbison song.
yeah,
I think that was originally, correct me if I'm wrong, was it supposed to be Dennis Hopper?
it was.
And then I think during rehearsal, almost tripped over the mic and just thought, "Oh, I'll pick up and start singing," and thought actually that works better than Dennis
Yeah,
Hopper.
and no one knows where that because he had a sort of a stage lamp or a worker's lamp, which he used as a mic, which sort of lit up his face, which made the whole thing. But no one knows what it was doing on stage or where it came from. It was just one of those. It just happened to be there. The actor found it and the director knew that, oh, this is the thing that makes it work. This is special, and just went through it. Twin Peaks again. There was when it was originally filmed and written, the character of Bob didn't really exist. The Red Room didn't exist. They were just happy accidents. It was
Mm.
the Bob, which is the sort of spiritual sort of villain. Um, it was just the set guy was on in the bedroom set, sort of working away, and he got caught in camera, and David Lynch was just like, "There's something here. That's that. He's just intuitive." You always say he's not an intellectual person. It's entirely intuitive. It's just how things feel that he sort of works on, um, and it's it's a good lesson to learn, really, that if all the, probably the most important things of something like Twin Peaks were happy accidents, you know, you have to trust things like that. You have to go with them when if you're making something yourself. You can't rigidly go, no, we're not doing that. We're doing this. You just have to be more playful about it. Just let it evolve, let it sort of happen.
Yeah. After I think it was another Oscar nomination for Lynch. What was his standing like as a director in America at this point? Because he'd had two Oscar nominations. He had films which, okay, they did okay at the box office, but they were more, for want of a better word, almost cult films in many respects. Although I think
Mm.
*And for Man made money, and I think Blue Velvet might have as well. How was he perceived as an American, sorry, as a director at that point?
At that point, after he did Twin Peaks, particularly, there was just a moment where he was on top of the world. He won the Palme d'Or at Cannes. Um, he was doing, uh, adverts for all the perfume brands and the sport brands, and doing stuff with Michael Jackson, and everybody sort of wanted a piece of him for a very, very brief period. And then it turned, and then he was yesterday's news. And the Fire Walk With Me film was booed at Cannes, so the story goes. And he felt like he just couldn't get arrested. He was, Twin Peaks in particular had put him into the mainstream. It's not a place you'd expect to find someone like that. But there was something about him as a person. He has this uh, how do you slightly hokey small town way of talking, um, where it's all peachy keen and that solid gold buster, and that was probably not that dissimilar to how a lot of his generation of filmmakers talked back in the 50s, except that they sort of rejected all that come the 70s and the 80s. They sort of rejected that small town, sort of hokey sort of persona, to become more sort of sophisticated, city dwelling sort of people. Lynch never really saw the need of becoming something that he wasn't. He always kept this sort of Eagle Scout like, innocent or slightly innocent, brimming with goodness, sweet, innocent sort of thing about him, and which was unusual in the late 80s and the early 90s. So he became well known very quickly, for being so distinctive. Um, but I don't know, his work isn't for everyone. I think there's the ability to tolerate ambiguity differs from people to people. There's all, um, on psychological measurements, they have this thing called the ocean score, where people's assessed on things like, openness, conscientiousness, neuroticism, and all these things like that. The ability to tolerate ambiguity or to enjoy ambiguity, is very heavily linked to how open people are, psychologically. So it's not everyone. Not everyone can handle his stuff. For some people, it's just it's too strange. It doesn't. It's not a simple, satisfying entertainment. Um, it may not make sense on a first watch. You may have to go back to it. But it will make you feel in a way you've never felt from watching any other film. And some people are drawn to that. So the mainstream is really the wrong place for him because he's not for everyone. But for the people who react to that, it was, I mean, it's after he died, I think that's the thing that really prompted this book was there's just the outpouring of love for him when he died. And this was a guy who couldn't get a film greenlit for the last 19 years of his life. And yet people were so impacted by him, so moved. It's like there was, public shrines sprung up. There's one around the mascot to a Bob's Big Boy burger place in, I think, Burbank, and people leaving flowers and donuts and cigarettes and owls and logs and all this sort of thing. And filmmakers don't get public shrines. That doesn't happen. If you think of our, most revered filmmakers, I don't know, like Christopher Nolan or Denis Villeneuve or someone like that, when they die, people will be, upset, but they aren't going to be going out into the streets and building a shrine to someone they've never met. It's very, very special people that happens for. David Bowie, Princess Diana. It's
Yeah.
it's that sort of thing. And Lynch affected people on such level that that's what they did. That's what it did. And it wasn't everyone, but it was the people who got his sort of stuff. Um, yeah, that was what it was. So yeah, so a, a, a mainstream successful appeal kind of was never on the cards because his audience is, as I say, it's not everyone. It's not for everyone.
Before we go into Twin Peaks, how would you describe Lynchian? Because it seems to be one of those things where, or one of those descriptors where you know it,
Mm,
or you see it, and what you see explains more than how actually describing it. So,
yeah.
how would you, if there was a dictionary definition, how would you describe the term
Yeah,
Lynchian?
it's that's an interesting thing because everyone gets it. Everyone knows what Lynchian is. But when other people do the same things, the same techniques, it doesn't work. It's like only he can do it. Um, you get a lot of, film students and stuff sort of ripping off the sort of the tropes of the black and white flickering lights and the ominous sort of noises in the background and all those sort of flashing electricity and all the sort of things that you associate with him, like car headlights going out in the darkness and things like that. They're easy enough to do, but it's just not the same. It just isn't the same. And really, it's that's what took me a little book to write to sort of try and work out exactly what it was. It was. I think it's more of an approach than the or more an it's more an attempt to put the audience in a state of mind that they're receptive to what he's trying to show you than it is all those little tropes and tricks and the stereotypical things that you might expect of him.
Mm. So, I think after Blue Velvet, it was Twin Peaks. And
Yeah.
when I was reading your book, one of the things you said, which really struck me, is now film directors going to TVs is a lot more common, whereas
Mm.
back then it wasn't. The only person I could think of who, after making films, went to TV for sure was actually Michael Mann with
Oh,
Miami
yeah.
Vice.
Hmm.
Um, but as good as a director he was, he made films which people knew about, but um, like Manhunter, which later became a failure, I don't think was as well critically acclaimed. He wasn't
Mm.
making the type of films that made people sort of take notice as much as Lynch. He's still a very good film writer, but Lynch, it seems that a lot more people knew him than Michael Mann. So
Yeah.
bearing that in mind, what prompted him to go and make a TV series, especially a TV series as surreal as Twin Peaks, because that could have easily ruined his career.
Mm.
He plays cards right.
Oh yeah, I mean, for most filmmakers, the thought of at his level, Oscar nominated sort of filmmakers, the thought of going to make television would be seen as career suicide. It would look like, you're on the skids. It would look like you're desperate or something like that. But it's like what I was saying earlier. He was an artist rather than a filmmaker. Film was just a way to get his ideas across. Um, he was just as interested in painting as that, or making soundscapes, or making a chair, anything like that. These were all as valid to him. So why not TV? It was just another medium, another thing to explore, another thing to see what he could do. He was not a career-minded um, auteur or filmmaker in any way. He was an artist, and artists experiment and they try things and they sort of see what happens. And he was very pally with Mark Frost, who had made Hill Street Blues and who knew television, and he knew that he could teach him everything he sort of needed to know, and he was very happy to keep working with Mark Frost. Um, and so, yeah, for those reasons, why not? And it was, they made it for a network that was one of the least successful at the time. The like ABC and NBC were far ahead of them, or whatever it was, and they were just prepared to take a risk, to try something, to try and get an audience. And so they sort of let him. They just, sure, if someone like David Lynch is prepared to make TV, let them do whatever they like. And at that time, TV was very formulaic. Um, this is Twin Peaks can be seen as the very first hint of the sort of the golden age of TV drama that followed in the early 21st century. The first sign that you could do more with TV. Um, yeah, it was such an extraordinary thing to happen. It's so unlikely, that A, something that strange would be made, and B, that it would become, if only briefly, you know, one of the most successful programs in America.
Yeah, it was an extraordinary piece of work. And he acted as well in
Mm.
that film also. And that was something he would do later on with the Steven Spielberg film, which we'll talk about later. But yeah, he shows cases as a writer, as a director, as an actor. But the one thing I think most people remember besides the plot is the iconic music.
Yeah.
I think, and that's still played in here adverts now, and why. Even if you never watched Twin Peaks, you know that have that music comes from there because it transcended that program. How did that come about, and who actually composed it?
Oh, it was Angelo Badalamenti, who's worked on a lot of David Lynch's things. They just seem to sort of get each other and understand each other. It's well worth searching out. There's a clip on YouTube of Angelo Badalamenti talking about how he wrote the theme music, and it was just David Lynch was sat next to him, he was sat at the piano, and David Lynch would describe, you're going into the woods, it's dark, the wind is up, the leaves are moving like this. You see a figure, you get closer, it's a young girl. He was just talking like this, and Angelo was sort of playing what sort of came out. And the way he describes it was that was the Twin Peaks theme. It just emerged. It was just found. It wasn't something he said to Lynch, "Oh, I'll work that up," and he was like, "No, that's perfect. Don't change a thing. You've got it. It just sort of it was just there in their conversations. Extraordinary piece of music. Extraordinary piece of music. And Lynch is a person who brings out the best in his collaborators, I think. Actors as well as musicians and things like that. And the work they do with him, there's something about it that transcends what they do with other people. He sees things in people, and has a skill of bringing it out that's quite extraordinary.
Yeah, in a weird way, that piece of music reminds me, although two different, completely different pieces of work, reminds me of Mike Oldfield's music from The Exorcist.
Oh yeah,
It's almost like a duller, although there's the similarities is original in many respects, there are elements of it all it kind of reminds me of that. Although obviously Tubular Bells is a lot more, it's a lot faster, it's a lot sharper, it's a lot more
yeah.
um not reactive, but it's a lot more immediate, I think.
Mhm.
As Twin Peaks just sets that mood. Like if it was foggy and that music came on in my head, you know what's going on with that. And I think obviously that's a good thing. And audience seem to take to that series too, because obviously he done very well. And especially to stretch it out, because network TV in the States, I think it was like over 20 episodes the first season. So
First season was the second one was.
the second one was okay.
First season was like 6 or 8 episodes. I can't remember off the top of my head.
Oh, okay.
Um, and that was massive. But the second one sort of trailed off in terms of ratings, and it was they solved the mystery of who killed Laura Palmer, and it was moved around the schedules, and everything went wrong with the second series, and it was cancelled. But for a brief period, it was the show in America.
Why? What happened with the second season? I know he was working on Wild at Heart as
Yeah.
well. So but what else contributed to that the downfall of Twin Peaks during the second season?
Well, again, it was partly, as you say, he was working on Wild at Heart, so he only had limited sort of connection to it. And in his absence, people were trying to do sort of David Lynch style weird, which is, it's not really something you can fake. It's either comes from David or it doesn't, it's and so the parts of the next season, I mean, there's a lot of good things in the second season of Twin Peaks, don't get me wrong. Um, but it just lost viewers. It just disappeared off. It sort of picks up again brilliantly at the end when Lynch came in and directed the final shows and sort of wrapped it all up. All that sort of stuff is great, but there's long parts in the middle where um, you know it's just not as good as it could have been.
Mm. So he did obviously Twin Peaks second season didn't go well. Then he did Fire Twin Peaks Fire and Walk with Me, which I
Mm,
named earlier. Although it's seen as a very good film, excellent film now, back then it was
mm.
like Bird at Cannes and whatnot. Which I imagine I was to say must have been very galling for him because he'd won the Palme d'Or with Wild at Heart not too long before that. So
Yeah,
the change was very, very quick.
very, very quick. And I think most people would rate Fire Walk with Me far above Wild at Heart in the quality of those films. But the critical appraisal is very removed from. Um, it's very much a thing of its time. It's how people are feeling at the time rather than what the film is actually like. People didn't. There was some good feeling towards Twin Peaks still, but people were thinking of it in terms of the cherry pie, the damn fine coffee, the um, the warmth of of, of Twin Peaks. That's what sort of people remembered. Whereas Fire Walk with Me is very firmly going, no, this is a story about a father who rapes his daughter. And it's incredibly dramatic. That film, the ending of that, the end last half hour or something like that, is an extraordinary thing to sit through, and it's difficult on many levels because of the sort of the darkness that it's dealing with. So that was not cherry pie and coffee, put it that way. And it was not what people wanted at that time.
Yeah. So he's done. He does that film flops in many ways, and then I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, he didn't do a film then until The Straight Story in 1999. Is that correct?
Did you do when was Lost Highway?
I know he done Lost Highway before. He must have done about 2 or 3 years before with Bill.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is a film I've not seen. I've only seen clips of it, but it looks again another.
Yeah, I mean, doing this book, I mean, obviously I knew all these films before, but it was an excuse to go back and revisit them all. And I found that every time you went and rewatched one of his films, it got better. It went up in your estimation. Um, possibly June accepted it, but
Mm.
and I kind of had the notion that Lost Highway was one of his lesser films until I went back and watched it and rewatched it a few times, and I don't think that at all anymore. I think it's fantastic, Lost Highway. If you don't know it, go for it. It's just well worth seeing. Some extraordinary scenes in there.
Yeah. And then did A Straight Story,
Mm.
which again, one of the films that Rear Praise has done really well.
I
Uh,
love the straight story, and I don't really talk about it in the book, and it bothers me because when I first agreed to write the book, I thought I could talk about the straight story because it always gets overlooked. Um, and it's a shame because it's like Elephant Man, really. It's just emotionally perfect. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And whenever I would try and get it in the book, it just didn't quite fit. And so I moved bits of it around, and it just in the end it fell out. So I feel a little bit bad about the lack of attention to the straight story in that book. It's certainly not for a lack of love for it, anyway.
would you say that film is the least Lynchian of all of David Lynch's films?
I think that's why it didn't really fit in the book. But it does illustrate aspects of him that are utterly fundamental to him. It's the way that there's no villain, there's no antagonist at all in the film. All the characters are good and decent. Um, and it's a vision of a positive vision of small town America that's kind of been lost now in these Trumpian days.
Mm.
You couldn't really imagine anyone making a film like that now. It's very unusual for a film not to have an antagonist or a villain. The only sort of villain is really time or aging. That's the
Yeah,
that's what that film's sort of about. So it's very unusual, but it is it says a lot about his values and things like that. So I think it is important.
yeah. And then after that, he made the film that really, if you like, completed a comeback with Mulholland Drive.
Yeah.
Now, I haven't seen this film for many years, and I think
Hmm.
the last time I saw it, I understood parts of it, but other parts I didn't. And one of the interesting things you say in your book is that younger viewers seem to understand the story and the story structure a lot more than older viewers, older film fans. Why do you think that is? Is it because we're more sophisticated? Well, people are more sophisticated in terms of the what films can do now.
Yeah, I think that's a large part of it. I think we've sort of caught up with him. We're sort of used to sort of non-linear stories now. We've watched multiverses in Marvel films, and we've watched Stephen Moffat's timey-wimey sort of plots and things like that. And when you've got a film that's two different realities, and one is kind of a dream of the other part of it, in the 90s, well, early 2000s, we didn't get it. I mean, if you look back at people talking about the film then, there's a general acceptance that it's incomprehensible, right? But you see it now and you go, oh, no, it does make total sense. And it is a very complete story, and it's a very sad story. It might take one or two watches, don't get me wrong, but it's no one thinks it's incomprehensible anymore. It's interesting that we've caught up with him, I think. He got it at the time. We didn't, but we're getting there.
Yeah.
And I think it probably is his masterpiece.
Mm.
I think it's probably the one.
Yeah, indeed. I'd agree with that. And again, another award. I think it's for someone who's not as lack of mainstream as Lynch and as surreal as he is. I think he's done 10 films and he got nominated for Best Director 4 times,
Mm,
which, considering the style of his films, is actually extraordinary because the Oscars can sometimes they award epics and whatnot, but safe epics, if you know what I mean, like look grand
mm.
and spectacle, but don't necessarily add anything to the conversation. But as this, he was completely different to what we'd known before or even since. And yet, so to get to four by director nominations at the Oscars for that is quite an achievement.
Yeah, and Mulholland, whenever you see a list of the best films of the 21st century, it's guaranteed to have Mulholland Drive near the top in any big sort of list anyway. Um, it is recognized as a masterpiece, and it's just extraordinary that he's just unable to get films funded in Hollywood after it. Considering what a incredible piece of work it is. You think anyone in a position to get films made would want to make a David Lynch film, to have that as a sort of something that they've done, to have that on their obituary. They got a David Lynch film, but bizarre that it didn't happen. Bizarre that he was just shunned after that.
Mm. Then he did Inland Empire, which ended up being his last film.
Yeah.
I do did things after that, which we'll discuss. But there's a couple of points in the book that you mentioned, and I want to bring those up. Um, and I'll caveat this by saying that all the actors who worked with him said how great he was. I don't remember any actor saying, "Oh, he was really nasty." There's parts of it where he says he has a temper, but that
Mm.
temper, the clips I've seen on YouTube tended to be about him wanting to make the film he wants to make. It was never about the actors and if they got something wrong and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
I think the first things you mentioned is A, the lack of ethnic minorities within his films, and
Yeah.
B, in regards to the women in his films. It was a particular type of women, almost these innocent, almost, especially their films, almost 1950s style women in his films.
Hmm.
And both of those are almost seen as criticisms of his. Do you want to just talk a little bit about those two?
Yeah, I mean it's interesting that the considering the amount of his plots that hinge on sexual abuse of women, um, that his the extent to which his fan base skews female is kind of interesting. The extent to which, and the Twin Peaks Return is the real example of this. He just basically cast white people, just particularly major roles, and lack of gay people, particularly gay men. There would be a lot of there were lesbians, but they were very conventionally attractive femme sort of lesbians. There was a lot more nudity of women than men. There's a lot about him and his politics that is coming from that Republican small town
Mhm.
that he never really questioned. He never really addressed it. And when he was criticized, he kind of just ignored those criticisms. I talk a bit in the book about how he signed the petition for Roman Polanski to be allowed back in the country. And it was only when he spoke to his daughter afterwards that he understood, why she was so horrified by this, that Polanski had drugged and raped a 13-year-old child. And he wasn't thinking victim. He just did not see things in wider social terms. He was just totally sort of focused on an individual first understanding of the world and how it worked. So when the the rape of Isabella Rossellini's character in Blue Velvet was picketed, and there was huge complaints about it. He just couldn't see where those were coming from. He's going, but it's just this character. That's the story. That's what happened to that character. Couldn't think in terms of, the overall depiction of women in films in the 1980s. His mind sort of didn't work on that sort of level. Um, and so there's a lot you could criticize with him, but I kind of find it interesting. He isn't really criticized that much for these things, and I think it's because on that individual level, there is a sort of a kindness and a decency in him. I think of the transgender character in Twin Peaks as a good example of this, um, played by David Duchovny, and there's a bit in The Return where Lynch playing Gordon Cole talks about the abuse that the character got when they transitioned and how he told those clown comics to fix your heart or die. You know, it's become a real sort of beloved phrase in the trans community, fix your heart or die. Um, and Lynch would never, come out in support of the trans community in general. That's not how he worked. He just didn't think in terms like that. But when he dealt with an individual person, he dealt with them on a very sort of human level. So even though he's very easy to criticize on a social level for his thinking on a social level, he kind of gets away with it because deep down there's a goodness to him. It's an interesting thing, I think.
Yeah, very interesting thing. And even since his death, where, especially in this day and age, people talk about diversity and DEI and so on and so forth. Nothing, people just see it as a good film, which is how it should be. Like, they're just good films and anyone can watch them
Yeah.
and understand them as well. His last major project was the Twin Peaks: A Return, but it very
Mm,
nearly didn't happen. Now,
mm,
I remember watching on, I can't remember, it was on social media, well, either Twitter as it called then, or YouTube, where the video of all the actors who he hired saying, I won't do, effectively, I won't do this without David Lynch, or
mm.
he won't do it without Lynch. And eventually he came back and they agreed. What was the initial disagreement about regarding his return to
It was with budgets essentially the budget that was it Showtime you did it for? Yeah, it was Showtime.
Showtime?
Um, basically, they work on a budget per episode understanding that you're doing a series and each episode costs this and you're getting this many episodes. And Lynch was basically, I don't know how long this is going to be. I don't know, how many episodes it's going to be or anything like that. Just leave me alone and I'll and I'll make it. And their spreadsheets were like flashing red and going, this, no, not at all. And in the end, because everyone was refused to do it if it wasn't Lynch, and they found a compromise, and he came back, and he eventually made essentially an 18-hour film. So they got far more episodes than they were expecting for
Mm.
the same money. But it was just he just doesn't work like other people. Again, it's that sense of he 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 needs to explore when he's filming and find things and look for happy accidents and come up with new and strange things that are part of it, and that's what makes it so vibrant and alive and special. It's not formulaic. You know, it's not this much money equals this many minutes or anything like that. Unfortunately, that they were able to, see this, and this dispute got resolved. And it's kind of a miracle that it exists, I think. It was just that brief period in time when the networks were panicking about the streamers and they were prepared to just throw money at anything, different. Um, and for Lynch to be able to conceive of with Mark Frost a story of that size, that's to say, an 18-hour film, which, and he was in his about 70 or something when he made it. It was exhausting for him. It was a huge undertaking. It's probably one of the most, ambitious, creatively ambitious pieces of drama of the 21st century, surely. I can't think of anyone else who's working on that sort of scale of, uh, and at the way that it's not what anybody expected or wanted from the return of Twin Peaks. He just refused to do well, here's, Agent Cooper and the cherry pie and the damn fine coffee. And it's not even set in that sort of slightly 1950s version of the past that, it's very much 21st sort of century. It was completely different from what people expected, which is, of course, exactly what you want from Lynch because he's going to take you someplace you're not expecting. And that's kind of the appeal, that's kind of what you need from him.
Yeah, and again, everyone liked it. Everyone seemed to really enjoy it. When I read about what you just said in the book, I do remember thinking I can understand Lynch's argument, and in terms of like the budgeting, because I'm surprised with. I know Twin Peaks isn't sci-fi or whatnot, but it has that surrealism, and so there are going to be probably a little bit of effects as well. But especially if you're doing like a sci-fi series, or how
Mm.
you are going to have special effects in many guises and whatnot, and practical effects. There might be some episodes you're going to use more special effects and practical effects than others. So I would have thought just giving someone a budget and saying you can make as many episodes, or even probably live into the episodes, but say this is a budget, these amount of episodes you can make. You can spend it any way you want, but those are only two limits.
Yeah,
Because some episodes are going to have more special effects than others. So to me, it makes a little bit of sense what Lynch did. If it was just a box standard drama, then yeah, I could understand a network. But I think in a show where you're gonna have more practical effects in some episodes than others, then obviously you probably have to budget more for certain episodes, move around the money at times.
yeah,
Seems like that's what David Lynch did to make this extraordinary. I mean, especially Showtime, 18-hour long episodes.
yeah,
It's Showtime, like HBO, they don't tend to do series like that. It tends to be like 10, 11, 12 episodes at most.
yeah.
Yeah, so fair play for him to letting him do it.
And if you look at, the most famous is episode 8, season 3, episode 8. If you say that to any Twin Peaks fans, it's almost dialogue free for huge parts of it. It's probably the most avant-garde experimental hour of television ever. It's unlike anything else, you know. Um, and you're not going to understand what the experience of watching an episode like that is like from a piece of paper, from a planning document, because no one had ever seen anything like it before. It was so extraordinary. It was almost like, um, I mean, the whole series really was the summation of everything that he'd been doing. All his ideas and tropes and favorite actors and favorite, musicians, and it was a combination of everything that he'd done before, all sort of put together in this sort of ultimate version of what David Lynch is. Um, yeah, phenomenal stuff, phenomenal stuff. Some, there's obviously you can see money men being nervous about the idea. Well, just leave that man alone. He's an artist. He'll do something. You can understand them being worried about that a lot of the time, but with David Lynch, I think it's necessary.
Yeah, indeed. And then the one thing, last thing he did, well, that was the last thing he did as a director, but the last thing he did on screen was obviously, as I said earlier, it's about the Fablemans,
Yeah.
me and John Ford. I mean, it's in a way it's iconic because it's one of those videos on YouTube and on social media that's been replayed over and over and over again.
Mm,
And it seems perfect for it.
yeah.
Even though it's similar to what happened with, I know it's from a directing point of view, but similar to what happened when we talked about George Lucas speaking to David Lynch about directing Return of the Jedi. In a way, you think that's really bad, but this is, you wouldn't necessarily think of David Lynch initially as
Mm,
Ford, but it seems to work perfectly in that scene.
yeah. It's the perfect send off, really, isn't it?
Mm.
It's with this cigar and the smoking and uh, him talking about how the young character, who is essentially Steven Spielberg as a young kid, how he needs to understand pictures in terms of art rather than movies. Um, and it's a passing of the baton sort of moment from one version of Hollywood to the other, and it's perfect for David Lynch. And that final shot of him, where he just sits back and says, "It's my pleasure," or something like that,
Yeah.
is just a lovely way to sort of to say goodbye to him, I think.
Yeah. And as I say, after he passed away, the outpouring of great outpouring was incredible
Mm,
from people who'd watch his films to the actors, and with much affection as well. Like you had people like Naomi Watts and Laura Dern and Patricia Arquette trying to do impersonations of him and just spoke of the fun they had. And
yeah.
it's rare sometimes you get that sometimes with like main real big filmmakers, but with him, yeah, such a big affection that everyone has for him.
Yeah, and you can tell that it's not just you know, industry sort of happy clappy sort of insincere. It's very, very sincere. The love that actors like that had for him. You can't really fake it, I don't think.
No, indeed, indeed. I would highly recommend this book. It's a nice, compact book here. It's called Lynchian, The Spell of David Lynch. Highly recommend it to everyone. Just quickly, a couple of things. What are you planning to write about next?
Well, I haven't announced the next book yet. It's not out till next year, so I'm sort of keeping that one tight. But I am busy, Chris. I'm working. I'm working away. I've had one of those days where my word count. I worked and worked, and I deleted so much stuff that the word count didn't really change. But I
Yeah.
am working away. I'll keep quiet on what it is at the moment. I call it my winter book, but I'm not really going into it at the moment.
Okay, cool.
I've got the paperback of the book about Doctor Who coming out as well in April.
Okay.
So that's the next thing out.
Okay, cool. If people want to find out more about your work, where can they go?
My website, johnhiggs.com, and I have a newsletter that you can sign up to and things like that.
Okay, cool. Well, John, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you about wonderful director. Thank you for so much for coming on to 86 Project.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure, Chris. And if you are at the King's Heath bookshop in April, I'll say hello then.
Yeah, I recommend that. I'll leave the link to the event. I think there's still tickets for it. I'll leave a link to the event if anyone wants to come to that in April. Okay.
Much appreciated. Yeah.
Oh, cool, man. Cheers, John. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris.